Hello everyone, and welcome to Turkish Spotlight Secrets. Today we're unpacking a story that has followed two of the most talked about names in recent Turkish television, Ebru Şahin and Akın Akınözü. If you enjoy calm, detailed storytelling that keeps the focus on people, craft, and context, you're in the right place. Be sure to like, subscribe, and, if you want more in-depth coverage, consider joining our community. Now, let's step through the timeline carefully and tell this story the way fans have been piecing it together, without exaggeration, but with all the color that makes it matter. The beginning is familiar to anyone who watched their breakout work together. On the set of Hırkay, Ebru Şahin and Akın Akınözü met as colleagues and quickly grew into close friends. They were both stubborn about craft in the best sense. Rehearsing until the camera crew asked for a break, discussing tiny gestures between takes, trading notes like two people who both wanted a scene to hold up even after the fifth rewatch. That mutual respect built an easy rhythm. When one of them arrived to set tired, the other kept the energy up. When a scene was emotionally heavy, they took turns keeping the atmosphere light until the slate clapped and everything shifted into focus. But the same intensity that makes great scenes can also spark friction. Late in the season, after a long night shoot that stretched past its call time, tensions rose. Accounts differ about the exact trigger. Some say it started with a disagreement about choreography and camera angles, others say it was about time pressure when the schedule left no room for another take. What most versions agree on is this: voices carried farther than usual, instructions overlapped, and a conversation that should have stayed technical drifted into something personal. It wasn't dramatic for the sake of drama, it was the kind of clash that happens when two professionals see a different path to the same goal and forget, for a moment, that the goal is shared. The aftermath felt colder than any argument. On sets, a disagreement is usually solved with a handshake, a reset, and a joke about caffeine. This time, the reset didn't land. For days, Ebru kept her focus tight on the work, limiting small talk to essentials. Akın did the same, choosing to arrive just on time and leave as soon as his scenes wrapped. The distance was polite, even respectful, but it was distance. Fans who read body language as if it were dialogue noticed the absence of their usual warmth and began to speculate. Industry pages quietly noted that two people who had been inseparable between takes were now walking different routes to the same stage. A rumor grew that the friendship had shattered. That version was never quite true. Akın, even while struggling to understand how they had drifted apart so quickly, said to people close to him that he valued Ebru as a colleague and as a person. He didn't pretend to grasp every decision she made, but he began doing something that marks growth in any long partnership: he tried to see choices through her eyes. He reminded friends that the pressure on both of them was real, that fatigue can turn small differences into noisy ones, and that respect is measured in how you treat someone after a hard day, not just during an easy one. For her part, Ebru noticed things about Akın that rarely make it into headlines. She watched the care he took with his family, especially his mother. She saw how days of relentless work didn't stop him from answering a call or sending a quick check-in. That devotion told her something about his center of gravity. In quieter moments, away from cameras and clapperboards, she answered professional texts with warmth, acknowledged his efforts to smooth the path forward, and made clear that while space was necessary, support had not disappeared. The friendship bent, it did not break. The timelines fans share online often hinge on public appearances, so here's one worth remembering. Months after the on-set clash, both were present at a private industry event, more a working reception than a party. The room was full of producers, writers, and actors who all understood the stretch and strain behind a finished episode. Ebru arrived with her team, greeted the hosts, and stayed focused on conversations about scripts and schedules. Akın entered later, spoke with the director about a scene he wanted to push further, and drifted toward the exit as the room grew louder. Somewhere between entrance and exit, paths crossed. Witnesses describe a brief exchange. Respectful, steady, with the kind of eye contact that says more than a paragraph. No staged photo, no lingering performance. Just a reset that registered. Then, a new turn in the story, not a clash, but a concern. Reports circulated that Akın had heard remarks attributed to his mother in a context he didn't control. He was upset, not at Ebru, but at the idea that stray quotes could draw unnecessary attention toward the people in her life. Specifically, he worried that Sadie Osman might be dragged into the conversation by proximity, that headlines would start bending two careers and a marriage into a single storyline. In a world where anything can be clipped and posted without the before and after, this was more than a publicist's headache. It was a personal fear that private circles might be pulled into a storm they did not choose. Akın's response, according to those who know him, was simple: take the oxygen away from the spark. He didn't reply online. He didn't speak in riddles for attention. He reached out through the quiet channels that matter, clarified what could be clarified, and drew a firm boundary around the people who weren't part of the set or the story. If an apology was needed for unintended noise, he offered it where it counted. If a correction was needed, he made sure it reached the right ears. That approach doesn't trend, but it protects. Ebru matched that tone. She kept the spotlight on her craft, splitting days between series work, rehearsals with a respected theater ensemble, and preparation for a concert project that let her stretch voice and presence in a different direction. Her social media stayed centered on work, gratitude for teams, and small glimpses of process rather than personal commentary. The message, consistent and quiet, traveled farther than 100 reactive posts. Life is big, the work is bigger, and private relationships are not content. What did fans do with all this? At first, what fans always do, they built timelines, compared expressions, interpreted pauses. But a deeper thread also emerged. People who had followed both artists for years began praising the way they handled a difficult chapter, without public flameouts, without turning colleagues into sides, without using the comment section as a courtroom. A segment of the audience started modeling that same restraint. Under highlight clips, you could see reminders to be kind, to verify before sharing, to avoid tagging people who had not volunteered for the conversation. The culture around the story matured. Professionally, the experience left marks that might be useful to remember. On sets that followed, both actors insisted on clearer buffers around difficult scenes. Coordinators were looped in early. Rehearsal time was protected rather than squeezed. Expectations about intimacy, choreography, and end-of-day rap were written down rather than assumed. None of this was revolutionary, but the discipline saved energy that would otherwise have been lost to misunderstandings. And, in its own way, it honored the very thing that brought them together at the beginning, the shared desire to do the work well. As for the friendship that started this story, it found a new shape. Instead of constant proximity, there was deliberate contact. Instead of banter between every take, there were thoughtful messages when it mattered. If they crossed paths at an audition room door, there was warmth without performance. If a script called for intensity, they trusted the preparation enough to let the scene carry the weight rather than the past. And when the past came up, as it always does among people who have shared long days and longer nights, they acknowledged it without letting it run the room. If you are listening and hoping for a dramatic twist, there isn't one. What exists instead is a quiet truth about professional lives lived in public. Ebru Şahin and Akın Akınözü began as colleagues who turned into close friends, argued like people who cared about the work, moved apart when distance was needed, and found their way to a steadier place that respects every layer, career, family, and the privacy of those who never asked to be part of a headline. Through it all, one principle kept surfacing: support does not always look like standing center stage together. Sometimes it looks like protecting one another from noise none of this should generate. So where does that leave the story now? With two artists continuing at full stride, carrying lessons forward, and keeping their circles safe. With a community of viewers who have learned to separate what belongs on a behind-the-scenes reel from what belongs at someone's dinner table. And with a final reminder that the strongest bonds in this business are often the ones you hear about least. The arc is not explosive, it is human. The friendship did not disappear, it adapted. Thank you for watching and for caring about the people behind the performances. If balanced storytelling like this is your style, please like the video, subscribe to Turkish Spotlight Secrets, and click the join button to support deeper reporting done with respect. We will continue to follow the projects of Ebru Şahin and Akınözü, and whenever there is a verified development that deserves your attention, you will hear it here, clearly, calmly, and with the context it deserves.